Why do you always try so hard? In the end, you're just a shadow in everyone's life." Eric's voice sliced through the air as we sat at the dinner table. His words stung, sharp and painful. I glanced at the food in front of me, finding it hard to swallow anything with the tension wrapping around my throat like a vice. "You don't have to be so mean," I murmured, barely audible. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my fork. Eric scoffed. "Mean? I'm just stating the obvious. Look at you, Taylor. You're 35, and what have you achieved? A dead-end job as a customer service rep." His parents, Sharon and Greg, exchanged uneasy glances across the table. They rarely intervened in these outbursts. Maybe they felt sympathy, but it was buried under layers of diplomatic smiles and blank stares. Linda, my mother, piped up, her voice steady, despite the tension. "Everyone's path is different, Eric. Taylor works hard and she has a good heart." Eric laughed mockingly. "A good heart doesn't pay the bills, Linda." I looked at my mother, seeing the concern etched in her features. Her eyes met mine, silently conveying her support. She always had my back, a constant anchor in the storm of my marriage. "Eric, that's enough." Linda's voice had an edge now. "We're here to have dinner, not to belittle Taylor." "Let it be, Mom," I whispered, trying to avoid escalating the conflict. The last thing I wanted was another fight. The house had enough bruises from our shouting matches. Eric's fork clinked against his plate as he leaned back, his eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and disdain. "Whatever. I'm just tired of pretenses." The rest of dinner was a strained affair. Little conversation passed, mostly Sharon and Greg making awkward attempts to steer the conversation to safe topics. We finished quickly, the silence heavy with unspoken words and simmering tensions. As we cleared the table, Sharon approached me in the kitchen. "Taylor, are you okay?" Her voice was tentative, almost as if she was afraid of the answer. I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Sharon. Thank you." She nodded but didn't look convinced. "If you ever need to talk." "I appreciate it, really." I hurried to stack the plates, eager to end the awkward encounter. Later, in the car on the drive home, Eric couldn't resist one last jibe. "You need to toughen up, Taylor. You're too sensitive. That's why no one takes you seriously." I stared out the window, watching the dark outline of trees pass by. Silence felt like the safer option, a thin shield against his words. That night, as we lay in bed, the distance between us felt like an abyss. I could hear his breathing, but it did little to comfort me. The man I fell in love with, who was charming and attentive, felt like a distant memory. In the dim light of the room, I thought back to the early days. Eric had been so different then. When we first met, he was charismatic, full of sweet words and grand promises. But those days were long gone. Now his charm was a weapon, and I was the target. I reached for my phone, a message from my sister Larissa lighting up the screen. "Hey, are you all right?" "Yeah, just the usual," I texted back. "We need to talk. Tomorrow after work?" "Sure." Her response brought a tiny spark of hope. Maybe things could change. Maybe with Larissa's help, I could find a way out of this darkness. That thought lingered as I drifted into sleep, a sliver of light in the otherwise relentless night. "Why are you still here? It's clear you serve no real purpose." Eric's words greeted me as I entered the kitchen. He was sipping his coffee, eyes flicking over the newspaper, acting like his insults were just another part of the morning routine. "I live here too, Eric," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He lowered the paper slightly. "Barely, Taylor. You're just another piece of the furniture now. Really, what have you done to contribute around here?" I opened the fridge, looking for something to focus on instead of his cutting words. "I work, I cook, I clean." "Bare minimum," he interrupted. "If you actually had ambitions beyond answering phones and making bad coffee, maybe things would be different." I gritted my teeth, swallowing the retort that bubbled up. "I'm doing my best." "You should try actually aiming higher," he shot back, his gaze cold. "You think you're holding this family together? You're just a weight around our necks." The doorbell rang, breaking the cloying silence. I hurried to answer it, grateful for the interruption. It was Larissa, standing there with a determined look. "Hey, Tay," she said, stepping inside. Her hug was warm, a much-needed contrast to the cold kitchen. "Morning, Larissa." Eric's voice oozed sarcasm. "Come to rescue your damsel in distress, sister?" Larissa's eyes narrowed. "Just here to check in, something you might try doing without tearing her down." Eric smirked but didn't respond. He turned back to his newspaper, a silent dismissal. We retreated to the living room. Larissa squeezed my hand. "How are you holding up?" "Same as always," I sighed. "Thanks for coming." "No problem." She glanced toward the kitchen. "He's unbearable, Tay. You don't have to take this." "I know, but it's not that simple." "What if it could be?" Larissa whispered, leaning closer. "I've been thinking. There's a way out." "Out? We set a trap. He's so full of himself he won't see it coming, but you need to trust me." I hesitated. The fear of Eric's backlash loomed large. "What do you have in mind?" "Document everything, every insult, every financial move. We need evidence. Then we hit him where it hurts." "Won't he notice?" "Play along for now," she urged. "Be his shadow, like he says. Use his arrogance against him. He's predictable, Taylor. We can use that." "I'm scared, Larissa," I admitted. She squeezed my hand tighter. "I'll be with you every step. You deserve better. We'll make it happen." After Larissa left, I felt a tiny ember of hope start to flicker. Maybe this could work. At work, I tried to focus, but Eric's words lingered, gnawing at me. Larissa's plan sounded risky, but what did I have to lose? My life was already a constant state of humiliation and fear. That evening, I started small. A notebook hidden in my purse, jotting down his insults, tracking his spending. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, one note at a time. Eric noticed my quietness at dinner, but didn't press. He was too busy boasting about some new deal at work, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. As the days passed, Larissa and I met in secret, refining our plan. Her confidence was contagious, bolstering my resolve. Eric remained oblivious, too wrapped up in his own importance to see the storm brewing. Each note in the notebook became a step closer to freedom. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of control. We were setting the stage, and soon, Eric would face the consequences of his cruelty. It was only the beginning, and every undercover note was a quiet promise to myself that this life wouldn't be my forever. With Larissa by my side, we'd make sure of that. Larissa and I sat at the coffee shop, our usual meeting spot. She laid out a few documents in front of me. "Eric is predictable. Use that to your advantage." I glanced at the papers, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. "So, what's the plan exactly?" "We need to act like everything is normal. Document his behavior and get him to lower his guard. I've started planting seeds, making him think he's smarter than everyone else," Larissa explained. "But how do we get him to slip up?" I asked, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Easy. Eric's vanity will be his downfall. We'll play into his ego, make him believe he's invincible," she said with a glint in her eye. "Keep acting submissive. I've started to cozy up to him, too." "You're going to talk to him?" I gasped, concerned for her safety. "Don't worry. It's all part of the act," she reassured me. "I need him to think I'm on his side. It will make our case stronger when the time comes." Later that day, Larissa visited our house, her demeanor completely different. "Hey, Eric, you seem to be doing great at work. Tell me more about it." Eric grinned, basking in the attention. "It's going well. Not everyone can handle the pressure, but I thrive in it." "You always were the ambitious one," Larissa purred. "Remember those days back in college? You always knew how to charm people." I watched from the kitchen, amazed at her performance. Eric lapped up the praise, oblivious to the trap being set. We continued our charade for weeks. Larissa would drop by, buttering Eric up, building his confidence. Meanwhile, I collected his insults, his financial missteps, every shred of evidence. One evening, Eric barged into our room, his face a mask of arrogance. "I've been thinking, Taylor, maybe it's time you consider other employment. You know, something that won't embarrass me." "Embarrass you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Yeah," he sneered. "People at work know you're in customer service. It's not exactly prestigious." "I'll look into it," I replied, my heart pounding as I noted his words later that night. As part of the plan, Larissa started subtly hinting at my possible departure. "You're so much better than this, Taylor. Maybe it's time to think about moving on." Eric looked intrigued. "Are you trying to get rid of her?" "Just suggesting she deserves better," Larissa said smoothly. "And maybe you do too." Eric's eyes lit up, his ego swelling. "Maybe you're right. I do deserve better." This was our green light. Eric began dropping hints about wanting a divorce, thinking he had all control. During one conversation, he said, "Taylor, I think we should separate. It's clear you're not happy, and honestly, neither am I." Feigning devastation, I clutched at my chest. "What do you mean, Eric?" You heard me, he said smugly. I think it's for the best. What about the house, the finances? I asked, eyes wide, playing my part. Don't worry about it. I'll make sure you get something, he replied, already dismissive. Behind the scenes, Larissa and I prepared everything. She coached me on how to negotiate terms that seemed favorable to Eric, but were actually advantageous to me. Each step felt like a careful tread over thin ice, but with Larissa's support, I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Eric was falling into the trap, blinded by his arrogance and the illusion of control. Every move brought me closer to freedom, and with Larissa by my side, I knew we'd pull it off. You're worthless. I deserve better than you. Eric's words echoed in my mind as we sat across from each other in the dimly lit living room. He was gearing up for another confrontation, believing he held all the cards. I've made my decision, Taylor, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I want a divorce. Feigning devastation, I looked down, letting silence hang between us. If that's what you want. He smirked, clearly enjoying his perceived power. It is. And you'll support me in this, won't you? Make this smooth and easy. Of course, I whispered, playing my role, but we need to discuss the terms. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I'm listening. Let's keep the house. I mean, for now. We can sell it later and split the money, I suggested, knowing his ego would want to keep appearances. Fine, he said, dismissive. What else? I hesitated, then added, I need some time to find a new job, and I'll need some financial support while I do. He rolled his eyes. Typical. Can't even find a job on your own, but fine, I'll set up some temporary payments. Just don't drag this out. My heart raced. Each agreement he made was another step in our plan. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, whatever, he muttered, getting up. I'm going to bed. The next few days were tense, but quietly productive. I continued documenting everything. Larissa and I met often, fine-tuning our approach. Eric's arrogance made him blind to the trap setting around him. One evening, Eric was particularly smug. Larissa, you've been such a breath of fresh air lately. Finally, someone who gets it. Larissa played along effortlessly. Eric, you deserve someone who appreciates all you do. Eric's chest puffed up, his grin wide. Exactly. Taylor never did. Soon, you'll be free to find someone who does, Larissa added, her eyes meeting mine for a brief second before turning back to Eric. We had him. His increasing smugness made him careless. In private, Larissa and I gathered more evidence, strengthening our case. Eric remained blissfully ignorant. Finally, the day for the initial confrontation arrived. Eric walked into the living room, his face a mask of triumph. Taylor, it's time. I'm filing for divorce. Pretending to be devastated but resigned, I nodded. If that's what you want, Eric. It is, he said arrogantly, and it's what's best for both of us. Playing my part, I subtly began negotiating terms favorable to him, but loaded with traps. All right, let's discuss the split then. He smirked, clearly enjoying his perceived power. You'll get whatever I decide is fair. Just don't make this difficult. I nodded meekly. Fine, but I'll need some money to get back on my feet. Consider it done, but don't expect much, he said, dismissively. Eric's face was a mixture of arrogance and self-satisfaction. Little did he know, each agreement was a nail in his coffin. The next few days were a delicate dance of pretending to concede while gathering more incriminating evidence. Each interaction, each promise he made was carefully documented. One night, as we wrapped up dinner, Eric leaned back overconfidently. Soon this will all be over. Aren't you relieved, Taylor? I managed a weak smile. Yes, Eric. Very relieved. As Eric's confidence grew, his vigilance waned, and it was time to set the final stage. Each moment brought me closer to freedom, and Eric was too wrapped in self-delusion to see the walls closing in around him. With Larissa's support, we were ready to pull the trigger on the plan that would finally unshackle me from his tyranny. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with tension. Eric sat across the table from me, oozing confidence. His lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, leaned forward. Let's get started, shall we? Larissa sat beside me, her demeanor calm and collected. We've documented everything, and we believe a fair settlement is in order. Eric sneered, cutting in. Fair? You've never worked a day beyond answering phones, Taylor. Let's not kid ourselves. Larissa handed over a thick file. This contains evidence of financial mismanagement and verbal abuse. We'll use it in court if necessary. Eric's smug smile faltered for a second before he quickly recovered. You're bluffing. Am I? Larissa opened the file, revealing page after page of detailed records. We've logged every instance of abuse and every questionable financial move. Eric's lawyer went pale as he flipped through the documents. This could be problematic, Eric. Eric's mask of arrogance slipped. You think you're going to win this? Larissa's calm was unshakable. We just want a fair settlement. All the evidence points to a very clear case of misconduct. And you can agree to the terms, or we take this to court. Eric's eyes flashed with anger. You won't get away with this. Yes, we will, Larissa said, her voice steady. Taylor deserves justice, and she will get it. Eric's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. Eric, we need to settle this. The evidence is strong. Eric's face twisted into a sneer. Fine. What do you want? We keep the house, Larissa started, and a substantial financial settlement to ensure Taylor can rebuild her life. This is absurd, Eric retorted, slamming his fist on the table. Papers fluttered to the ground. You think you can just take everything? You left us no choice, I said softly. We're prepared to take this to court, Eric. Everything is documented. Eric's rage was palpable. You think you can walk away from me, Taylor? This was my life, my work. And your abuse, Larissa interjected. This ends now. After a heated exchange and several tense minutes of negotiation, Eric finally relented. The terms were agreed, heavily favoring me, a result far from his expectations. He glared at me, venom dripping from his words. You'll regret this. No, Eric, I replied, meeting his gaze. You will. The meeting adjourned, and Larissa and I walked out, the weight of the years of abuse slowly lifting from my shoulders. As the sun set, I could almost feel the chains breaking. Larissa hugged me tightly. We did it, Tay. You're free. I couldn't have done it without you, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. This is just the beginning, she said, smiling softly. Now we rebuild. The next few days were a whirlwind of legalities, but everything had fallen into place. Eric signed the papers, his outrage simmering beneath a forced acceptance. I took a deep breath, stepping into my new life. The house felt different, lighter somehow, without Eric's oppressive presence. Each room, once filled with tension, now seemed to echo with the promise of freedom. Eric's downfall was swift. News of his abusive behavior spread quickly, his professional and personal reputation shattered. Co-workers distanced themselves, and the respect he had commanded vanished almost overnight. I watched as karma executed its slow, just vengeance, and Larissa stood by me, a pillar of strength. Our plan had worked perfectly. As Eric's world crumbled, I could finally begin to rebuild mine. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of liberation. This was just the start of my journey, and with Larissa's unwavering support, I knew I'd find my way to a brighter future. The corporate party was in full swing, laughter and clinking glasses filling the grand hall. Eric relished the attention, his ego soaking up every admiring glance and flattering comment. He had no clue what was about to unfold. Larissa and I exchanged a meaningful look. Ready? She asked softly, her voice steady. I nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Larissa stepped forward, raising her glass to catch the room's attention. Everyone, may I have a moment? Conversations hushed as all eyes turned towards her. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge Eric's contributions, she began, her tone deceptively warm. Eric smiled broadly. Thank you, Larissa. I always knew you recognized true talent. She smiled back, but there was a sharpness to it. Indeed, Eric, you've shown us all what true manipulation and deceit look like. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eric's smile faltered, confusion clouding his face. What are you talking about? As some of you may know, Eric has been less than honorable both at home and at work, Larissa continued, her voice growing firmer. I think it's time we bring the truth to light. Before anyone could react, she signaled a video to play on the screen behind her. Footage of Eric's verbal abuse, financial misdealings, and unflattering office behavior filled the room. The silence was deafening as his peers watched in shock. Eric's face turned beet red. This is an invasion of my privacy. You have no right. We have every right, Larissa shot back. People deserve to know who they're really dealing with, both personally and professionally. The crowd buzzed with disbelief and judgment. Murmurs of, I never expected this, and what a fraud filled the air. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but clear. For years, I endured Eric's cruelty. But with Larissa's help, I found the strength to stand up. This is not just about me, it's about exposing the truth. Eric lunged towards me, his face twisted in anger. You'll regret this, Taylor. Several colleagues held him back as Larissa held up her hand. Eric, it's over. Your lies are exposed. Now face the consequences. Eric's boss, who had been watching with a stern expression, spoke up. Eric, I think it's best if you leave. We'll be discussing your future at the company, or rather, lack thereof. The reality of his situation seemed to sink in, and Eric's bravado crumbled. This is a setup. A smear campaign. No, Eric, Larissa replied calmly. This is the truth catching up with you. The event concluded with Eric escorted out, his face a mix of rage and despair. As the guests dispersed, the ripples of Eric's disgrace spread quickly, the news traveling faster than the wine being poured. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. The truth was out, and Eric's reign of terror was ending. Larissa turned to me, smiling. You did it, Tay. We did it. Thank you, I whispered, tears welling up. I couldn't have done it alone. No, but you had the strength all along, Larissa said, giving me a reassuring hug. Now it's time to rebuild. In the days that followed, the fallout from Eric's exposure was swift and brutal. The company terminated his position immediately, and his professional network severed ties. Social media buzzed with the scandal, making Eric a pariah overnight. Meanwhile, Larissa and I focused on the future. I started making plans to return to work, feeling a new sense of purpose. The house, once a prison, now felt like a sanctuary. Each day brought a bit more hope and a lot more healing. With Eric out of the picture, life began to take on a new hue, a chance for renewal and the promise of a better tomorrow. The nightmare was finally over, and a new chapter was beginning, one where I held the pen, and I vowed to write a story of strength, freedom, and endless possibilities. Eric sat alone in the small, dingy apartment he'd been forced to move into. His face was a mask of anger and disbelief. Life as he knew it had crumbled, and his attempts to salvage his reputation and career were met with closed doors and disdainful looks. Karma had struck, and it showed no mercy. His phone rang, the ominous chime making his already tight nerves tenser. It was a former colleague. Eric, I warned you not to mess with people's lives. Now look at you. Nobody wants anything to do with you. You didn't think this would come back to bite you. Shut up, Michael, Eric snapped. You're no saint either. I'll find a way back. You'll see. Michael sighed. You're delusional. Nobody trusts you. You're poison. Face it, you did this to yourself. Eric threw the phone across the room in a fit of rage. The reality of his situation was sinking in. He had no job, no friends, and no influence left. Meanwhile, my life was beginning to bloom. Linda, my ever-supportive mother, called to check in. Taylor, dear, how are you holding up? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. I'm actually doing well, Mom. A lot better. That's wonderful to hear, she said, her voice filled with relief. I'm proud of you, Taylor. Standing up to Eric took a lot of courage. Thanks, Mom. Larissa deserves a lot of credit, too. She's been amazing. Larissa arrived shortly after our call ended. Hey, how's it going? She asked, her tone cheerful. Really good. I even started looking at some job listings today. That's great news, she said, giving me a hug. You deserve all the happiness in the world after what you've been through. As we spoke, we couldn't help but reflect on Eric's downfall. It had been swift and merciless. His reputation was in ruins, and his influence evaporated. Calls from lawyers and creditors were the only communication he received these days. Eric's tried to reach out a few times, I mentioned. He's desperate. Larissa rolled her eyes. Typical. He never thought there'd be consequences. Well, karma's real. Eric, it's finally caught up with you. For a moment I felt a pang of sympathy, but then I remembered the years of torment and manipulation. This was justice. Days turned into weeks, and Eric's misery deepened. He filed for bankruptcy, his lavish lifestyle reduced to nothing. An old acquaintance dropped by out of curiosity. Eric, how do you sleep at night? He asked, shaking his head. None of your business, Eric growled, his pride still unyielding despite his circumstances. But really, Eric, people warned you. You treated Taylor like trash, and now you're reaping what you sowed. Eric slammed the door on him, his heart pounding with frustration and futility. In contrast, I was thriving. The sense of liberation was overwhelming. Every morning felt like a new beginning. I reconnected with old friends, finding support and strength in those bonds. With Larissa's legal guidance, I secured a new job that valued me for who I was. Each step forward felt like a triumph and a reclaiming of my life. Eric's attempts to retaliate, meanwhile, were thwarted at every turn. Legally, financially, socially, Larissa had ensured all bases were covered. He was boxed in, the arrogant predator finally becoming the prey. I met Larissa for lunch one afternoon, feeling a happiness that had long been absent. "I can't believe how much has changed," I said, sipping my coffee. "It's only going to get better, trust me," Larissa replied confidently. "Eric is finished. And you? You're just beginning." As we clinked glasses in celebration, I felt a surge of relief and joy. This was just the start of my new journey, and with every passing day, I was walking further and further away from the shadow of my past. The sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows of my house, casting a warm glow on the freshly decorated living room. It no longer felt like a prison. It felt like home. Linda arrived with a smile, holding a pot of her famous chili. "Look at this place. It's so bright and welcoming," she said, setting the pot on the kitchen counter. "Thanks, Mom. It finally feels like mine," I replied, hugging her. Larissa rang the doorbell moments later, her arms loaded with groceries. "Ready for the housewarming party?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "Absolutely," I said, taking some bags from her. "I can't believe how much has changed." We spent the afternoon preparing for the small gathering. Soon, friends and family filled the house, their laughter echoing through the rooms. It felt surreal, seeing so many people who genuinely cared about me. Greg and Sharon, Eric's parents, approached me hesitantly. "Taylor, we're so sorry for everything Eric put you through," Sharon said, her eyes sincere. "We should have done more to help." I smiled softly. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." Linda joined us, giving them a reassuring smile. "Taylor's moving on, and she's surrounded by people who love her. That's what matters now." As the evening wore on, the atmosphere was filled with warmth and camaraderie. It was a stark contrast to the years of tension and fear. The shadows of the past were being replaced with the light of new beginnings. Later, as we cleaned up, Larissa sat down, exhausted but happy. "This place is really coming together, Tay." "Thanks to you," I said, sitting beside her. "I couldn't have done any of this without your help." "You had it in you all along. You just needed a little push," she replied, squeezing my hand. Reflecting on the journey, I felt a mix of relief and pride. I'm starting to believe that. Larissa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. "Eric's been causing trouble again, trying to dispute the settlement." I sighed. "He won't give up, will he?" "No, but he's got no ground to stand on. We've made sure of it," she said firmly. "He's fighting a losing battle." As predicted, Eric's attempts to retaliate proved futile. Every legal move he made was countered by Larissa's thorough planning. He was trapped in a web of his own making. One day, I received an unexpected call from Eric himself. "Taylor, you've taken everything from me," he spat, his voice laced with bitterness. "No, Eric, you lost everything because of your actions," I replied calmly. "It's time you face the consequences." "You think you've won? This isn't over," he snarled before hanging up. I set the phone down, my heart steady. I knew his threats were empty. Larissa's legal defenses were rock solid, and I had built a support system that wouldn't let me falter. The weeks turned into months, and Eric's presence in my life faded to a distant memory. His once towering influence was reduced to a whisper in the wind, overshadowed by the flourishing life I was building. I took on more responsibility at my new job, finding fulfillment and purpose I never thought possible. Each success, each new friendship, felt like another brick in the foundation of my reclaimed life. One evening, as Larissa and I sipped wine on the porch, I felt a profound sense of peace. "I never thought I'd feel this free," I admitted. "You earned every bit of it," she said, clinking her glass against mine. As I looked out at the setting sun, I felt a deep gratitude for the journey. Every painful step, every hard-fought battle. I was stronger now, not just because I survived, but because I was thriving. "Here's to new beginnings," I said, raising my glass. "To new beginnings," Larissa echoed, her smile reflecting the promise of a brighter future. The past was behind me, and the path ahead was mine to walk, and for the first time in a long time I felt truly ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.